The silence was the first thing she had purchased for herself. It was not the empty, echoing silence of the penthouse she had shared with Marcus for a decade, a silence that waited nervously for the sound of his key in the lock. This was a different vintage. This was the kind of silence that settles, that sinks into the floorboards of the fourth-floor walk-up and becomes part of the foundation. It was a silence made of cheap drywall and old pipes, of the distant hum of traffic on a street she had chosen for its anonymity. It was hers. Ilara sat on the edge of a mattress that lay directly on the floor. It was the only piece of furniture in the room, if one could call it that. Her worldly possessions were contained in a single leather duffel bag, the one she'd had in college, tucked into a corner like a sleeping animal. For 10 years, she had been the curator of a life, not a participant in it. She had selected the art, the furniture, the menus, the guest lists. She had managed the subtle architecture of Marcus's social ascent, transforming his brutish ambition into something that could be mistaken for respectable power. Her payment had been a gilded cage, beautiful and cold and utterly without a key she was allowed to hold. She had walked out 3 days ago with nothing but the clothes on her back, the duffel bag she'd retrieved from a forgotten storage unit, and a single credit card. The card had been canceled within the hour. A clean, surgical severance. He expected her to crawl. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate. He saw the grace and mistaken it for fragility. He saw the silence and assumed it was consent. Her bank account, one she had secretly opened with the pittance of an inheritance from her grandmother, held $317. It was a laughable sum, an insult to the life she had managed, but it felt more real than the millions that had flowed through the joint accounts she could no longer access. This money was hers, like the silence. She thought about the last conversation. It had not been a fight. Fights were for equals. It had been a pronouncement. He had decided to acquire a new company, and with it, the previous owner's daughter, a vapid creature with a famous name. The arrangement was, in his words, strategic. He had not asked for a divorce. He had simply informed Ilara of the new configuration. She would remain his wife, the elegant hostess, the manager of his public face. The other woman would be a private affair, an asset. She did not scream, she did not cry. She had simply looked at him, at his relaxed posture in the $1,000 armchair she had chosen, and felt a profound and terrifying calm. It was the calm of a final decision. That night, while he slept, she packed the old duffel bag and walked out into the city. She did not look back. A sharp, insistent buzzing from her phone broke the quiet. A text from Chloe, the owner of a small, struggling gallery in the West Village. "He's here." Just that. 2 words that felt like a physical blow. Ilara had an appointment with Chloe, a desperate, hopeful meeting to discuss the possibility of part-time work, of using the skills Marcus had found so useful for her own survival. She had known he would find her. Marcus did not tolerate loose ends. He did not tolerate possessions that decided they were people. She stood, her movements fluid despite the tremor in her hands. She put on the only other nice thing she owned, a simple, architecturally precise black dress she had bought from a consignment shop yesterday. It was a shield, armor made of fabric. The walk to the gallery was a study in controlled terror. Every black car that slowed, every man in a dark suit, sent a jolt through her nervous system. She was a creature relearning its instincts in a new, hostile wilderness. The city she had once commanded from behind tinted windows now felt vast and predatory. When she pushed open the glass door of the gallery, the little bell chimed a mournful note. Chloe was standing behind the small front desk, her face pale, and there, in the center of the small white-walled space, was Marcus. He was admiring a painting, his head cocked in that performative way he had, as if he understood its meaning. He did not. He only understood its price tag. He turned, and his smile was a predator's. It did not reach his eyes. "There you are," he said, his voice filling the small room, absorbing all the oxygen. "I was just telling your little friend here that you'd gotten lost. playing at being a normal person. It's a cute look for you, Alara. Very bohemian. Alara's gaze flickered to Chloe, a silent apology. Chloe gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Stay strong. Alara's focus returned to Marcus. She kept her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her tremble. Hello, Marcus. You're trespassing. This is a private appointment. He laughed, a short, barking sound. Everything you do is my business. This little tantrum of yours is over. You've had your 3 days. You've made your point. Now come home. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched. It was not an invitation. It was a command. No, she said. The word was quiet, but it was solid. A stone dropped into a still pond. His face tightened. The mask of charming husband slipped, revealing the tyrant beneath. No? Did you check your bank account, darling? Did you enjoy the walk over here? This is not a negotiation. You have an obligation. To me. To our life. The life we had is over, she stated. It was a fact, not an argument. He closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides, his hand clamped around her upper arm, his fingers digging into the muscle. The grip was painfully familiar. It was the one he used when they were in public, a gesture that looked like affection to outsiders but was a vice of control. Don't be stupid. You have nothing. You are nothing without me. I made you. Let go of my arm, she said, her voice still low, but now with an edge of cold fury. You'll leave when I say you can leave, he snarled, his face close to hers. His breath smelled of expensive scotch. You will get in the car, and we will go home, and you will forget this little adventure ever happened. You will sign the papers for the merger, and you will smile at the press conference. Do you understand me? She did not scream. She did not struggle. She simply stared into his eyes, and for the first time she did not see a monster to be feared. She saw a weak, terrified man, terrified of losing the one person who knew his power was a performance. It was in that moment, as his grip tightened and his knuckles went white, that a new sound entered the room. It was not loud. It was the soft, distinct clink of a heavy glass being set down on a marble plinth. A voice, low and calm as a deep river, cut through the tension. I believe the lady asked you to let go of her arm. The voice came from the gallery's far corner, a space partially hidden by a large, abstract sculpture. A man stepped out from behind it. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that was so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. He was not moving quickly. He did not rush. He was not performing. His presence was a physical weight that settled over the room, instantly changing its gravity. Marcus, startled, loosened his grip reflexively. He turned, his expression a mixture of annoyance and confusion. Who the hell are you? This is a private conversation. The man's eyes, a cool, intelligent gray, were not on Marcus. They were on Alara. He was looking at her, truly looking, with an expression of quiet recognition. It was a disorienting sensation to be seen so clearly after a decade of being looked through. This is a public gallery, the man said, his voice steady as iron wrapped in silk. He took another unhurried step forward. And you are causing a disturbance. Marcus puffed out his chest, his default response to any challenge. This is my wife. This is a domestic dispute. It's none of your concern. Your wife appears to be in distress, the man observed. He still had not raised his voice. He didn't need to. The power he radiated was not about volume. It was structural. It was the kind of power that owned the building, not just rented a room. And you are still holding her. That makes it my concern. From behind the man, another figure emerged, appearing as if from the shadows themselves. A younger man in a similar dark suit, with an earpiece and the unnervingly blank expression of a professional. He moved with a liquid efficiency that was somehow more menacing than Marcus's overt aggression. The man in the charcoal suit gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was not directed at Marcus. It was directed at Alara's arm, still in Marcus's grasp. The efficient subordinate, David, moved. There was no wasted motion. One hand gently but irrevocably pried Marcus's fingers from Alara's arm. The other rested lightly on Marcus's elbow. It was not a violent act, but it was absolute. Marcus was stunned into momentary silence. He tried to shake his arm free, but David's grip was like forged steel. "Get your hands off me! Do you know who I am?" The man in charcoal finally looked at Marcus, and the full, chilling weight of his attention landed. It was like being audited by a god. "I do, Mr. Valerius," he said, his tone still mild. "Your name is Marcus Valerius. You are the CEO of Valerius Holdings, a company with significant liquidity problems. You are 3 months behind on the lease for your office building and your penthouse. Both properties are owned by a holding company, which, as of this morning, I now control. So, in a sense, you are my tenant, and you are late on your rent." The blood drained from Marcus's face. The arrogant tyrant dissolved, replaced by a pale, sputtering man. He looked from the quiet sovereign to Alara and back again, his mind failing to process the sudden, catastrophic shift in power. He was working from a version of the world that was, like his version of Alara, years out of date. "Now," the man continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a soft, dangerous murmur. "My associate will show you out. You will not contact this woman again. You will not come within 500 feet of her again. If you do, our next conversation will be about liquidating your assets to cover your outstanding debts. It will not be a pleasant conversation. Am I clear?" Marcus could only nod, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The swagger was gone. The cruelty was gone. All that was left was the hollow shell of a man who had just watched his entire world get repossessed in under 60 seconds. David steered him toward the door. Marcus didn't resist. He was a puppet with its strings cut. The little bell on the door chimed again, this time a note of finality, and then he was gone. The silence that returned to the room was different now. It was not the silence of peace. Not yet. It was the silence of shock. Alara stood frozen, her arm tingling where Marcus had held it. Chloe was still behind the desk, her eyes wide. The man in the charcoal suit turned his full attention back to Alara. His expression softened, the hard edges of his authority receding. "Are you all right, Miss Vance?" She flinched. Not because he used her maiden name, but because he knew it. She had not been Miss Vance in a decade. She had been subsumed, erased, turned into Mrs. Valerius. Hearing her own name was like hearing a ghost speak. How do you know my name?" He offered a small, sad smile. "My name is Julian Thorne. My family's foundation, the Thorne Trust, sponsored a scholarship for art history at Columbia 12 years ago for a particularly brilliant student who showed immense promise as a curator. The student completed 2 years of the program before withdrawing for personal reasons. Her name was Alara Vance." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She remembered the scholarship. It had been her ticket out, her dream. A dream she had abandoned when she met a charming, ambitious man named Marcus Valerius, who had convinced her that his dreams were more important. "You've been watching me?" The question came out as a whisper. It was not an accusation. It was a genuine, disoriented question. "No," Julian said gently. "I have been aware of you." "There is a difference. When your name came up in due diligence reports concerning Valerius Holdings, I remembered it. I was sorry to see your talents were not being utilized." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "The Thorne Trust has been looking for a new director of acquisitions for its private collection. The position requires a deep knowledge of post-war European art and a discerning eye. It has been open for some time. I believe we have been waiting for the right candidate." It was not a question. It was not a pitying offer. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same quiet certainty with which he had dismantled Marcus's life. He was not rescuing a damsel. He was hiring an expert. He saw the person she was, the person she had been before Marcus, and was offering her a path back to herself. Ilara looked at this man, this quiet sovereign who had appeared in the wreckage of her life. She saw the impeccable suit, the calm gray eyes, the immense, effortless power. But underneath it all, she saw something else, something far more potent. She saw recognition. He was not offering her a cage, gilded or otherwise. He was offering her a key. She had to clear her throat. I would need to see the collection first. A genuine smile touched Julian Thorne's lips, reaching his eyes. It transformed his severe face, making him look younger, warmer. Of course, my car is outside. We can go now, if you're free. She looked at Chloe, who was now beaming, giving her an enthusiastic thumbs up from behind the desk. She looked at the empty space where Marcus had stood. She looked at the single stark mattress waiting for her in her tiny, silent apartment. Yes, Alara said, and for the first time in 3 days, the word didn't feel like an act of defiance. It felt like an act of creation. I'm free. The ride in Julian's car was an exercise in surreal tranquility. The vehicle, a large, dark sedan with blacked-out windows, moved through the city traffic with an unnerving smoothness, insulating its occupants from the chaos outside. The interior smelled of clean leather and something else, something subtle and calming like old books and rain. It was the scent of quiet, expensive stability. Alara sat against the plush seat, her hands folded in her lap. She was acutely aware of the man beside her. Julian Thorne did not fill the space with nervous chatter. He simply existed within it, his stillness, a palpable force. He stared out the window, giving her the room to process the violent swing of the day's events. The terror of Marcus's assault, the stunning efficiency of his removal, the impossible offer that now hung in the air. She replayed his words in her mind. I have been aware of you. It was a strange and unsettling thought. For 10 years, she had perfected the art of being gracefully invisible, a beautiful piece of scenery in Marcus's world. To think that someone, especially someone this powerful, had been aware of her as a distinct entity, as Alara Vance, was like discovering a forgotten photograph of yourself. You seem unsurprised by all this, she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. Julian turned his head slowly, his gray eyes meeting hers. I am rarely surprised, Miss Vance. I find it's more efficient to be prepared. Prepared for what? To run into my estranged husband assaulting me in a random art gallery? I was prepared for Marcus Valerius to self-destruct, he corrected gently. His business practices are reckless, driven by ego rather than strategy. It was a matter of when, not if. My presence at the gallery was not random. My company is the primary investor in Chloe's gallery. I was there to review the new exhibition. Your appointment was a coincidence. Your husband's appearance was an inevitability. Of course. The threads all led back to him. His power was not flashy or loud like Marcus's. It was woven into the very fabric of the city, silent and structural. He wasn't just a player in the game. He owned the board. And the job offer? She asked, a sliver of her old skepticism returning. Was that also prepared? The position is real. The need is real, he said, his tone unwavering. The timing is opportune. I do not make offers out of pity, Alara. I make them because they are advantageous. The Thorne Trust would be at an advantage to have you. Your analysis of the Jericho sketches in your second-year thesis was the most insightful I have ever read. You have a gift. It has been wasted. I am merely offering it a proper venue. He called her Ilara. The shift from Miss Vance was subtle, but it landed with significance. It was an invitation into a different kind of circle, one where she was a person, not a title. The car pulled to a smooth stop before a limestone monolith, a pre-war building that took up half a city block. A doorman in a severe gray uniform materialized and opened her door. Julian led her through a cavernous, hushed lobby of marble and dark wood, into a private elevator that ascended without a sound. The doors opened directly into a penthouse that made Marcus's look like a cheap imitation. The space was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of the city. But unlike Marcus's penthouse, which was decorated to impress, this one was curated to be lived in. The furniture was elegant but comfortable. Bookshelves overflowed with books, not just decorative volumes. And the art was breathtaking. A massive Rothko dominated one wall, its colors humming with energy. A Giacometti sculpture stood sentinel by the window, gaunt and profound. "This is your home?" Ilara asked, her voice hushed with awe. "It is," Julian said. "But the main collection is housed at the Foundation's headquarters. This is just what I like to live with." He gestured toward a hallway. "This way." He led her not to an office, but to a library. It was a 2-story room, walled with books from floor to ceiling, with a rolling ladder and comfortable leather armchairs. On a large, polished mahogany table in the center of the room, several large portfolios were laid out. "A sample," he said simply, "from the part of the collection that needs a curator's hand. Post-war acquisitions, many of them uncatalogued, acquired in haste during market upheavals." She approached the table, her earlier shock and fear receding, replaced by a familiar, thrilling hum of professional focus. This was her language. This was her territory. She gently opened the first portfolio. Inside were a series of charcoal sketches. She recognized the style instantly. The raw, frantic energy, the brutal honesty of the lines. "These are Auerbach's," she breathed, her fingers hovering just above the paper, afraid to touch. "Early work, from his student days. I didn't think any of these were in private hands." "They weren't," Julian said, his voice quiet beside her. "They were discovered in a cellar in Camden Town 2 years ago. We acquired the lot." She spent the next hour lost. The world outside the library ceased to exist. There was only the rustle of archival paper, the scent of old ink and charcoal, and the silent conversation with the artists across the decades. She moved from the Auerbachs to a series of hauntingly beautiful photographs by a little-known German artist, to a small, powerful oil painting that she identified as a lost work by Paula Rego. With each piece, her posture straightened, her voice gained authority. She was not the frightened woman from the gallery. She was not Marcus Valerius's decorative wife. She was Alara Vance, curator, historian, expert. She was home. When she finally looked up, flushed with excitement, Julian was watching her from one of the armchairs, a glass of water on the table beside him. He hadn't interrupted. He had simply observed, giving her the space to become herself again. "The collection is in disarray," she said, her tone direct, professional. "The cataloging is non-existent, and the thematic connections between the pieces are completely unexplored. It needs a firm hand, a complete overhaul of the archival system." "I agree," he said. "It would be a multi-year project. It would require a significant budget for restoration, research, and potentially new acquisitions to fill the gaps. The budget is not a concern." She took a deep breath, meeting his steady gaze. The power dynamic had shifted again. Here, in this room, surrounded by this art, they were not protector and victim. They were professionals, almost peers. "If I take this position," she said, "I report only to you. I will have full autonomy over the collection, the staff, and the budget you allocate. My decisions will be final." She was testing him, pushing the boundary. She needed to know if this was another cage, just one with better art on the walls. Julian did not hesitate. His expression did not flicker. "That is the job description," he confirmed. "You would be the director. I am the chairman of the trust. I expect to be briefed on your progress, not to micromanage your process. I hire experts and let them do their work." It was everything she wanted, everything she had been denied. A salary, a contract, a title, and most importantly, respect. "All right," she said. "I accept." "Good." He stood up. "My assistant David is arranging a corporate apartment for you in this building. It will be ready within the hour. He will also handle the drafting of your employment contract and the setup of your payroll and credentials. A car will be at your disposal. Consider it all part of your compensation package." He paused. "You will be safe here, Alara." The last sentence was personal. It was the only part of the conversation that was not about business. It was a promise. She felt a wave of emotion so strong it almost buckled her knees. It was not just relief. It was a profound, disorienting gratitude that was tangled up with a deep-seated suspicion of kindness. She had not been shown genuine kindness in a very long time. "Thank you," she managed to say. "There is no need for thanks," he replied, his voice back to its formal, quiet tone. "Welcome to the Thorn Trust." An hour later, David, the same man who had so efficiently removed Marcus, showed her into an apartment 3 floors below Julian's. It was not as grand as the penthouse, but it was beautiful, furnished with an understated elegance that spoke of quality and comfort. It was clean, quiet, and safe. The refrigerator was stocked. There were new clothes in her size hanging in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom, a new phone and a laptop sat on the desk. She walked through the silent rooms, touching the cool marble of the kitchen counter, the soft weave of the sofa. It was all so easy, too easy. Part of her, the part conditioned by a decade with Marcus, was waiting for the bill, waiting for the hidden cost, the unspoken expectation. But as she stood by the large window looking out at the endless tapestry of city lights, she felt a different emotion begin to push through the fear. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling. It was hope. She thought of Julian Thorne. He was a man made of quiet commands and immense hidden power. He had, in the space of an afternoon, erased her tormentor and handed her a new life. She did not know him. She did not know if she could trust him, but he had done something no one else had. He had seen her, and for now, that was enough. She took a slow, deep breath, and for the first time it did not feel like she was bracing for a blow. It felt like she was breathing in her own life. The first few weeks were a blur of focused, exhilarating work. Alara threw herself into the Thorn Trust's collection with a ferocity born of a decade of suppressed passion. The Foundation's headquarters was a sleek, modern building downtown, and her office was a minimalist glass box overlooking a private garden. It was a space that demanded clarity and purpose, and she was more than happy to provide it. She started by undoing the neglect. She hired a small expert team, a meticulous archivist from the Met, and a brilliant young conservator fresh out of a fellowship in Florence. Together, they began the monumental task of sorting, cataloging, and assessing the trove of art Julian had acquired. Each day was a treasure hunt. They uncovered masterpieces hidden in mislabeled crates, identified forgeries that had slipped past previous, less discerning eyes, and began to piece together the narrative of the collection. Alara was in her element. She worked long hours, fueled by strong coffee and the sheer joy of the work itself. Her team respected her. Her decisions were implemented without question. She was decisive, insightful, and her eye for quality was unerring. The frightened, subdued woman who had walked out of Marcus's life was gone, replaced by a confident, formidable professional. Her interactions with Julian were infrequent but significant. He would appear in her office, unannounced, usually late in the evening when the rest of the staff had gone home. He would not speak at first, simply standing in the doorway, observing her as she worked. She came to find his silent presence calming rather than intrusive. "The lighting in this section is inadequate for textiles," she said one evening, not looking up from a fragile 18th century tapestry she was examining. "The UV exposure is too high. We need to install museum-grade filters and directional LEDs. "I'll have David coordinate with facilities," was his simple reply. The next morning, a team of specialists was there. Another time, he found her staring intently at a painting on her computer screen. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "It's an auction piece, coming up at Sotheby's next month," she explained, zooming in on the image. "It's listed as Circle of Soutine. I don't think it is. The brushwork, the use of impasto here, in the hands, it's his. I'm almost certain it's a lost Soutine. If we can acquire it, it would be the cornerstone of our expressionist wing." "What do you need?" "Access to the piece for a physical examination, and a discretionary acquisitions fund that can move fast. If it's real, the big museums will be all over it once they realize." "You'll have a jet ready in the morning to fly to London," he said, "and a line of credit will be opened. Buy it." He did not question her judgment. He did not ask for a second opinion. He trusted her expertise completely. The slow burn of their relationship was built in these moments of professional synergy. It was not a romance of grand gestures and passionate declarations. It was a quiet, steady construction of mutual respect. He admired her mind, her passion, her resilience. She was drawn to his quiet strength, his integrity, and the profound sense of safety his presence provided. They would sometimes have dinner in the silent, soaring space of his penthouse library, discussing art, history, and philosophy. He was formidably intelligent, his mind as sharp and well-ordered as his suits. She found herself challenging him, debating with him, and he seemed to enjoy it. He was not a man who was used to being challenged. One evening, he asked her about Marcus. It was the first time he had mentioned his name since that day in the gallery. "He has been trying to make contact," Julian stated, swirling the wine in his glass. "Through legal channels, frivolous filings, demands for the return of his property." Alara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. What property? Jewelry, art, even designer clothing. All items he purchased for you. He's claiming they are assets of his company. "They were gifts," she said, her voice tight. "Tools of the trade, part of the uniform for being Mrs. Valerius." She had left it all behind without a second thought. "My legal team is handling it," Julian said, his tone dismissing the issue as a minor nuisance. "They are filing a countersuit for emotional distress and seeking compensation for the decade of unpaid labor you provided in building his social and business standing. The discovery process for that will be unpleasant for him." He took a sip of wine. "He believes he is fighting you. He does not yet understand that he is fighting me." The cold knot in her stomach eased. He was not just protecting her physically, he was fighting for her on a structural level, using the same legal and financial weapons Marcus understood, but with far greater skill and infinitely deeper resources. The true turning point in their personal relationship came a month later. Julian invited her to his family's estate in the countryside for the weekend. "My mother has heard about you," he said, a rare hint of dry humor in his voice. "She is demanding an introduction." Alara was nervous. Meeting his mother felt significant, a step into a more personal domain. The estate was an old stone manor surrounded by acres of rolling hills and ancient trees. It was a place that felt rooted in time, a bastion of old money and quiet power. Isabella Thorne was nothing like she expected. She was not a severe aristocratic matriarch. She was a woman in her late 60s with a cascade of silver hair, bright, intelligent eyes, and a warm, genuine smile. She was dressed in comfortable linen trousers and a cashmere sweater, her hands smudged with dirt from the garden. She greeted Alara with a firm hug. "So, you are the famous Alara," Isabella said, her voice laced with a gentle, teasing warmth. She held Alara at arm's length, studying her face. "Julian was right. You have kind eyes, but they're tired. This boy doesn't know how to let people rest." Julian, standing beside them, looked momentarily disconcerted. "Mother, Alara is my director of acquisitions, not my ward." "Nonsense!" Isabella waved a dismissive hand. "She is a guest in my home, and she is far too thin. We will feed you." Over the course of the weekend, Isabella drew Alara's story out of her, not with probing questions, but with gentle conversation and shared activities. They walked through the magnificent gardens, Isabella pointing out rare flowers and talking about their histories. They cooked together in the large, sun-drenched kitchen, kneading bread and sipping wine. In Isabella's presence, the remaining armor around Alara's heart began to dissolve. "Julian is a good man," Isabella said on the last afternoon, as they sat on a stone bench overlooking a lake. "But he is not an easy man. He has built walls around himself since his father died. He sees the world as a series of problems to be solved, assets to be managed. He doesn't let many people in." She turned her warm gaze on Alara. "He let you in. We have a professional relationship," Alara said, feeling the need to clarify, though she wasn't sure for whose benefit. Isabella smiled knowingly. "My dear, My son has never flown to London on a moment's notice and engaged in a bidding war for a painting because of a professional relationship. He did that because he believes in you. And he has not brought a woman to this house in 5 years. You are not just an employee to him, Ilara, and I think you know that. That night, Ilara couldn't sleep. She walked out onto the stone terrace of her room, overlooking the dark, silent grounds. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine. A few minutes later, a figure appeared at the other end of the terrace. It was Julian. He was holding 2 glasses. He walked over and handed one to her. It was brandy. "My mother likes you," he said. It was a simple statement, but it held weight. "She's a wonderful woman," Ilara replied honestly. "She's already annoyed with you on my behalf. She thinks you work me too hard." A ghost of a smile played on his lips. "She gets that from you. She thinks everyone works too hard." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their brandy, watching the moon rise over the lake. "I don't leave because things become complicated, Julian," she said suddenly, surprising herself with her own directness. She needed him to understand. She wasn't looking for a rescuer. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I know," he said. "You leave when you are no longer seen as a person. You leave when you are treated as an asset. I do not make that mistake." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was light, hesitant, almost reverent. It was not the possessive grip of Marcus. It was a question. She did not pull away. She leaned into the touch, just slightly. A small, momentous surrender. In that moment, under the vast, silent sky, the nature of their relationship was irrevocably altered. The last of her fear dissolved, replaced by a warm, steady certainty. This was not a cage. This was a sanctuary. And the man standing before her was not a king claiming a prize. He was a partner, offering his hand. Meanwhile, in his glass and steel cage high above the city, Marcus Valerius was descending into a spiral of impotent fury. He could not comprehend his fall from grace. In his mind, it was a temporary setback, a cosmic injustice that would soon be righted. "She'll be back," he slurred to one of the few remaining sycophants still willing to drink his expensive scotch. "Give her a month with that stuffed shirt, Thorne. She'll be bored out of her mind. She needs the excitement, the drama." He was blind to the fact that the drama was what had driven her away. He saw the news of her appointment at the Thorne Trust and scoffed. "A pity job. A little hobby to keep her busy. He's probably sleeping with her. She'll get tired of being a charity case." His lawyers, a high-priced and aggressive firm he could no longer truly afford, were meeting a stone wall. Every motion they filed was met with an avalanche of counter-filings from the Thorne Trust's legal department, a team of sharks who were calmer, better prepared, and infinitely better funded. The discovery process Julian had initiated was, as predicted, a nightmare. They were requesting a decade's worth of financial records, communications, and sworn testimony about Ilara's role in his business. They were systematically exposing the truth, that Marcus's empire was a house of cards, and Ilara had been the one skillfully holding it together. His credit was frozen. His business partners were abandoning him in droves, spooked by the sudden, chilling interest from Julian Thorne's empire. The name Thorne was a death sentence in their world. It meant you were on the wrong side of a very quiet, very final war. Marcus grew more desperate. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are predictable. Since he could not attack Julian directly, an act akin to throwing pebbles at a mountain, he fixated on his original target, Ilara. He had to reassert his control, to prove to the world and to himself that she was still his. His fatal miscalculation arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was an invitation to the Obsidian Gala, the Thorne Trust's most exclusive and high-profile annual event. It was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, an event Marcus had been desperate to get into for years. He saw the invitation not as the trap it was, but as a sign that Thorne was extending an olive branch, that his power was not as absolute as it seemed. Or perhaps, he thought with a surge of his old arrogance, Ilara had intervened on his behalf. She missed him. She wanted him back. He didn't realize the invitation had been arranged by David, Julian's quiet associate, through a third party who owed Julian a significant favor. It was bait laid with surgical precision. Marcus began to prepare. He spent the last of his liquid assets on a new tuxedo. He rehearsed his speech, the one he would give to Ilara when he found her. It would be a masterful performance of contrition and command. He would apologize generously. He would tell her he had been wrong, and then he would insist she leave with him right then and there. A grand, public reconciliation. It would be in all the papers. It would restore his reputation. It would put her back in her place. He had no idea he was walking willingly onto his own execution stage. He was a character in a play, and Julian Thorne had already written the final act. Marcus was simply arriving on cue for his dramatic, pathetic end. The night of the Obsidian Gala, the air itself seemed to vibrate with wealth and power. The event was held in the grand atrium of a museum that the Thorne Trust had almost single-handedly funded. A soaring space of glass and white marble filled with the city's elite. The light from the massive chandeliers caught on diamonds and glittered in champagne flutes. Conversations were a low, confident hum, the sound of people who owned the world talking to each other. Ilara moved through the crowd not as a guest, but as a host. She was wearing an emerald green gown, a column of silk that was both elegant and severe. It was a dress that did not ask for attention, but commanded it. Her hair was swept up, revealing the strong line of her neck and jaw. There was a new confidence in her posture, a calm authority in her eyes. She was no longer the silent, beautiful accessory to a powerful man. She was the architect of the evening, the director who had curated the stunning exhibition of modern art that lined the walls. She saw him before he saw her. Marcus was standing near the entrance, looking awkward and out of place. His tuxedo was a size too tight, his face flushed. He was scanning the room with a predatory intensity, and she knew he was looking for her. She felt a flicker of the old fear, a cold echo in her veins. But it was quickly replaced by something else, a cold, weary resolve. This had to end. Tonight. Julian materialized at her side, a silent, reassuring presence in a dark blue suit. He handed her a glass of champagne. "He's here," Julian said, his voice a low murmur in her ear. "I see him," she replied, her own voice steady. "He seems warm." A hint of a smile touched Julian's lips. "He's nervous. His world has shrunk to the size of this room, and he doesn't belong in it anymore." As if summoned, Marcus spotted them. His face lit up with a triumphant, possessive smile, and he began to push his way through the crowd toward them. He moved with his old swagger, but it was forced, brittle. "Ilara, darling," he boomed, his voice too loud for the refined atmosphere. He reached for her, ignoring Julian completely. "I knew you'd be here. You look stunning. That's my girl." Ilara took a step back out of his reach. The small movement was a clear, sharp rejection. "Hello, Marcus. You were not invited. You should leave." His smile faltered. The rejection, so public, stung his pride. "Don't be like that. I came for you. We need to talk. This whole thing has been a misunderstanding." He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I've been a fool. I know that now. I miss you. Come home. We can put all this behind us." "There is nothing to talk about," Ilara said, her voice like ice. "And I am home." Marcus's face darkened with rage. The performance was over. He dropped the pretense of contrition and reverted to his true self. He lunged forward and grabbed her arm, his grip hard and bruising. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. You are my wife. You have an obligation to me. You will leave with me now." The crowd around them fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. All eyes turned to the ugly, raw scene. This was the moment Marcus had wanted, a public spectacle. He had just horribly misjudged who the star would be. Julian did not move. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. It was a light touch, but it had the effect of an iron clamp. Marcus froze. "Take your hand off her, Marcus," Julian said. His voice was dangerously soft, a quiet sound that cut through the silence of the vast room. Marcus, emboldened by the audience, sneered at him. "Stay out of this, Thorne. This is between me and my wife." "She is not your wife," Julian stated, his voice still unnervingly calm. "The divorce papers were filed this afternoon. The petition cites your numerous infidelities and claims of emotional abuse, for which we have a mountain of evidence. You were served an hour ago. Your doorman signed for the documents. I imagine you were in too much of a hurry to get here to check your mail." Marcus's jaw went slack. "You're bluffing." "I don't bluff." Julian's gray eyes were cold and flat, like chips of granite. He slowly took out his phone. He didn't raise it like a weapon. He held it casually, as if checking the time. "Let's review your current situation, shall we? As of 9 a.m. this morning, your primary lender called in your loans, all of them. The holding company that owns that debt is, of course, mine." He swiped his thumb across the screen. "As of 11 a.m., the board of Valerius Holdings held an emergency meeting. They voted to remove you as CEO, citing gross financial mismanagement and potential criminal liability. The majority shareholder who called for that vote? That would be me. I acquired a controlling interest through a series of shell corporations over the last 6 weeks." Marcus began to tremble. A low murmur went through the watching crowd. This was not a domestic dispute. This was a public execution. "The penthouse you call home," Julian continued, his voice a relentless, quiet hammer. "The eviction notice was posted this afternoon. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. The art you tried to claim from Alara? My foundation purchased it from the gallery that day. The receipt is quite clear. The jewelry? It was documented as gifts, and my legal team is defining it as partial payment for her decade of uncompensated labor as your business and social strategist. We have 3 former board members willing to testify to that fact." Julian put his phone back in his pocket. He looked at the shattered man before him. "You have nothing, Marcus. You are not a CEO. You have no company. You have no money. You have no home. You are not a guest here. You are a trespasser in a rented tuxedo you can no longer afford. Every single thing you thought was yours now belongs to me." The finality of it hit Marcus like a physical force. His face, which had been red with rage, turned a pasty, sickly white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The performative confidence, the arrogant swagger, the petty cruelty, it all evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, hollowed-out man. His knees buckled. He sagged, held up only by Julian's hand on his shoulder and his own death grip on Ilara's arm. "Let go," Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. Marcus's hand fell away from Ilara's arm as if it had been burned. He stared at her, his eyes wide with a dawning animal panic. He had not just lost his money or his power. He had lost the narrative. He had lost the story where he was the king. He made a choked, sobbing sound. He fell to his knees on the cold marble floor, a broken, weeping mess in the center of the silent, watching elite. David and another security guard appeared, their movements as quiet and efficient as ever. They lifted Marcus to his feet. He didn't resist. He was weeping openly now, snot and tears running down his face. They escorted him out of the atrium, not with violence, but with the quiet, humiliating finality of taking out the trash. The silence he left behind was absolute. Julian turned away from the spectacle, his focus shifting immediately back to Ilara. He gently took her arm, his touch warm and steady where Marcus's had been brutal. "Are you all right?" She looked down at her arm, at the red marks left by Marcus's fingers. Then she looked up at Julian, and for the first time since she had met him, she gave him a full, genuine smile. It reached her eyes, crinkling the corners, and it was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. I am. Julian held her gaze for a moment, and in his eyes she saw a profound, quiet satisfaction. He had not done this for revenge. He had done it for restoration, to balance the scales. He turned to the stunned, silent crowd. His voice, now back to its normal, calm volume, carried through the atrium. My apologies for the interruption, he said smoothly. Now, if I may have your attention, there is someone I would like you all to properly meet. He gestured to Alara. Many of you have enjoyed the collection on display tonight. The vision behind it, the discerning eye that brought it all together, belongs to one person. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to Ilara Vance, the new Director of Acquisitions for the Thorn Trust and the most capable person in this room. He began to applaud, a slow, deliberate clap. For a second there was silence. Then, one by one, the assembled power brokers of the city joined in. The applause grew from a scattered patter to a rolling wave of thunderous ovation. It was a sound of acceptance, of recognition. It was the world acknowledging what Julian had seen all along. They were applauding her for her brilliance, for her strength, for her survival. Ilara stood tall in the emerald gown, bathed in the warm light and the sound of her own vindication. The weight of the last 10 years, the weight of being small, of being silent, of being owned, finally lifted from her shoulders. She took a slow, deep exhale, and it felt like the first true breath of her life. Later, after the guests had departed and the staff had begun to quietly clear the great hall, Julian led her to a private terrace high above the museum. The city spread out below them, a glittering carpet of infinite lights and infinite possibilities. The cool night air felt clean on her skin. They stood in silence for a long time, not touching, just sharing the space, the quiet, the view. The silence between them was no longer about shock or strategy. It was a comfortable, settled thing. The kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. Is it over? She asked, her voice soft. For him, yes, Julian replied. He has no moves left on the board. He will fade into a footnote. For you, it's a beginning. She turned to look at him. His face, usually so severe and controlled, was relaxed in the soft glow of the city lights. You destroyed him, she said. It was not an accusation, but an observation. I did not destroy him, Julian corrected. I simply held up a mirror. He destroyed himself. I merely expedited the process and ensured you were not part of the wreckage. He paused, his gaze searching hers. I would do it again. She believed him. He was a man of immense, ruthless power, but his ruthlessness was not chaotic or cruel. It was precise, purposeful, and aimed squarely at protecting what he valued, and he valued her. Thank you, she said. And this time the words were not a formality. They were heavy with the weight of her freedom, her safety, her future. He finally reached out and took her hand, his fingers laced with hers, a warm, solid presence. It felt right, inevitable. You don't need to thank me, Alara. We are partners now. Partners. The word resonated deep inside her. Not wife, not asset, not employee. Partners. Equals. She looked out at the city again, at the endless sprawl of it, and for the first time, it did not feel like a wilderness. It felt like a kingdom. And she was not a refugee hiding within it. She was standing at the center of it, beside a quiet sovereign who saw her as his queen. The future was no longer a terrifying unknown. It was a landscape waiting to be explored, a collection waiting to be curated, a life waiting to be built. And she would not be building it alone. She squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement, a promise. The beginning was here, and it was beautiful. In the months that followed, their partnership solidified into a new, quiet rhythm. Alara's life took on a shape defined not by fear, but by purpose and peace. She and Julian were a study in contrasts that complemented each other perfectly. She was the passion behind the art, the vibrant vision that gave the Thorn collection its soul. He was the quiet, unshakable foundation that gave her the freedom to create. They worked together seamlessly. Her days were filled with research, travel, and the thrill of the chase for rare pieces. She became a respected and formidable figure in the international art world, known for her unerring eye and her swift, decisive acquisitions. Julian's name opened every door, but it was Ilara's expertise that closed the deal. Their evenings were theirs alone. They would often eat dinner in the library, surrounded by the silent company of books, debating everything from the politics of the art market to the philosophy of Kant. He would listen, truly listen, as she spoke passionately about a new artist she had discovered, his calm presence a perfect counterpoint to her fire. The romance between them was a slow, deep current running beneath the surface of their daily lives. It was in the way he would have her favorite tea waiting when she returned from a long trip. It was in the way she would leave a book open on his desk, marked to a passage she knew he would appreciate. It was in the long, comfortable silences that needed no words. One rainy Saturday, they were in the Foundation's private archives, a climate-controlled vault deep beneath the headquarters. Ilara was showing him a new acquisition, a delicate, handwritten letter from Camille Claudel. "Look at the desperation in the handwriting here," she murmured, pointing with a gloved finger. "The lines are so frantic. You can feel her genius and her madness warring with each other on the page. She was so brilliant, and the world broke her." Julian looked not at the letter, but at Ilara's face, illuminated by the single archival lamp. He saw the empathy in her expression, the profound connection she felt to this long-dead artist. He saw the survivor in her recognizing another. "The world is not always kind to brilliance," he said, his voice low, "especially in women." She looked up at him, and in that moment the space between them seemed to shrink, charged with an unspoken understanding. He had seen her brokenness that day in the gallery, and he had not tried to fix her. He had simply given her the tools and the space to heal herself. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw. His thumb stroked her cheekbone, a gesture of infinite tenderness. "You are the most brilliant person I have ever known, Ilara Vance," he whispered. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. The last of her defenses, the final wall she had kept around her heart, crumbled into dust. She was not afraid. She was not waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was simply, finally, home. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of fiery passion or desperate need. It was a kiss of recognition, of arrival. It was quiet and deep and certain. It tasted of respect and safety, and a future that was as solid and real as the ancient stone of his mother's house. When they broke apart, they simply looked at each other, a slow smile spreading across both their faces. Nothing needed to be said. Everything had been decided. A year after the Obsidian Gala, Ilara stood on the balcony of their penthouse. It was their penthouse now. She had filled it with art that she loved, with color, and with life. She was wearing a simple silk robe, a mug of coffee warming her hands. Julian came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. He was already dressed for the day in one of his immaculate suits. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice a familiar, comforting rumble against her ear. She looked out at the morning sun glinting off the skyscrapers. "I was thinking about silence," she said. "I used to think it was the sound of being alone, the sound of fear. But it's not." She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "This kind of silence, it's the sound of not having to fight anymore. It's the sound of peace." He tightened his arms around her. "I like that sound." A file lay on the small table on the terrace. It was a dossier on Marcus Valerius, compiled by David. Julian had left it there for her to see, if she chose to. She had finally opened it this morning. He had ended up destitute, living in a cheap apartment in a city he no longer recognized, haunted by the ghost of a life he had lost. There were reports of public drunkenness, of pathetic, failed attempts to borrow money from old contacts who no longer took his calls. He was irrelevant. A ghost. She felt nothing. Not pity, not satisfaction, not even anger. He was simply a closed chapter in a book she had long since finished reading. Her story was here, now, in the warmth of the sun, in the taste of her coffee, in the arms of the man who held her. Some people will see your grace and call it weakness. They will take your silence for submission and your kindness for a flaw. They will build their castles on your quiet competence and believe they are kings. But strength is not always loud, power is not always seen, and sometimes the most profound changes do not begin with a shout, but with a quiet, final decision to walk away. The right person will not try to own you. They will simply see you, and in doing so, give you back to yourself. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his face. She looked into his calm, gray eyes, the eyes that had seen her from the very beginning. "I love you, Julian Thorne," she said, the words as easy and natural as breathing. "I know," he said, a soft smile playing on his lips as he leaned in to kiss her. "And I love you, Ilara Vance." And in the quiet peace of the morning, their new life continued, built not on obligation or drama, but on the steady, unshakable foundation of mutual respect and an extraordinary love.